Nothing is wrong. That's the part you can't say out loud to anyone, because the second you try, it sounds like ingratitude. The job is fine. Better than fine. People would take it. The apartment is warm, the car starts, the people who love you are still alive and still calling. You are not in crisis. There's no story here, no dramatic loss, nothing anybody could point to and say, well, of course you feel that way. And somewhere in the last year, a hollowness moved in and sat down in the middle of your life, and it has not gotten up since. You noticed it clearly for the first time on a morning after. Maybe it was the promotion. You'd wanted it for 2 years, told yourself the whole time that things would feel different once it came through, and then it came through. There were congratulations in the hallway. Somebody's kid made a sign. You called your mother, and she was so proud that you could hear her voice change, and that was the best part of the whole thing, honestly. Then you woke up the next morning at 6:40, before the alarm, staring at the ceiling in the gray light. And you checked in with yourself the way you always do first thing. Nothing. Not sadness. Not disappointment. Just a flat, quiet nothing where the feeling was supposed to be. You got up. You made the coffee. You didn't tell a soul. That morning is the reason we're sitting here tonight, and I want to tell you what I think is actually happening. Not the version where you're depressed, not the version where you're ungrateful, and definitely not the version where you need to be more grateful for what you have, which is the single most useless thing one American ever says to another. That hollow feeling is not a malfunction. It's a summons. And it's specific. And it's asking you for something, and most people never find out what. If that's the kind of thing you want to sit with, subscribe. And leave a like if that morning after was a little too recognizable. It's a quiet way of helping this reach somebody else who's currently pretending their nothing is fine. Now, let's be careful and precise, because this feeling gets mislabeled constantly. It isn't grief, because you haven't lost anything. It isn't burnout exactly, because rest doesn't touch it. You took the week off in October and came back to the same hollow, well-rested, and just as hollow. It isn't loneliness, because it shows up in a full house on a Saturday afternoon just as easily as it shows up alone. It has one distinguishing feature, and if you've got this one, you know exactly what we're talking about. It gets worse when things go well. A bad week almost feels better. A crisis is clarifying. You know what to do, you move, you're useful, and for a few days the hollowness is gone because there's something in front of you that obviously matters. It's the good stretches that are unbearable. It's the Sunday where everything is handled. That pattern is a clue, and it's the biggest clue in the whole thing. Because a hollow that gets worse when your life is working is not telling you that your life is failing. It's telling you the standard you've been measuring by has stopped meaning anything, and your body found out before your mind was willing to. You had a list. Everybody your age had one, and almost nobody remembers being handed it. Get the grades. Get into the school, get the degree, which turns into get the job, which turns into get the better job, find the person, buy the place, or at least get out of the lease with the roommates, save something, have the kid or decide honestly that you're not going to. Take the trip you'll put on the wall. It's not a stupid list. That's what nobody says. Most of the items on it are genuinely good, built by people who lived through things you didn't have to, and the list has kept an enormous number of human beings from wasting their lives. But look at what the list is, structurally. It's a set of instructions for a life, written by other people, handed to you before you had any capacity to evaluate it, and it comes with an unspoken guarantee attached. The guarantee is, complete these, and the feeling will arrive. Nobody says that part out loud. It doesn't have to be said. It's in the way people describe their own milestones, in every movie that ends at the wedding, in the specific tone your uncle uses when he asks what you're doing now. The list implies a destination, and the whole time you're climbing it, you're not just working, you're waiting. Waiting for the moment where the thing lands and the waiting stops. So you check the boxes. Some of them you check twice, and the feeling didn't arrive. Take that seriously for a second, because it's the most important piece of information you have received in your adult life, and your first instinct was probably to treat it as a symptom. If you completed the terms and the promised payment didn't come, there are only two possible explanations. Either you're defective or the contract was never real. You've spent years quietly assuming the first one. Everybody does. It's much less frightening to believe there's something wrong with you than to believe there was something incomplete about the entire arrangement. Because if it's you, then in principle, it can be fixed with more effort. And effort is the one thing you know how to produce. Friedrich Nietzsche spent his working life on exactly this problem, and he was writing about it in the 1880s, mostly alone, mostly ignored, in cheap rooms in the Alps. He had a word for the condition where the values you inherited stop being able to answer the question why. He called it nihilism, which in his hands didn't mean believing in nothing. It meant something more precise and more familiar. It meant the highest goals you were given lose their power to justify the effort, and you keep going through the motions anyway because you don't have anything else to go through. That's it. That's the whole thing. Not despair. Not darkness. Just the strange, low-grade emptiness of doing everything correctly and feeling no pull. He thought this was going to happen to enormous numbers of people, and he wasn't gloating about it. He was worried. He saw it coming, the way you can see weather coming. And here's what I find remarkable and a little comforting about that. The feeling in your chest on the morning after the promotion has a name, and it's more than 140 years old, and the man who named it did not think it meant you were broken. He thought it meant the old answers had run out, which is the beginning of something and not the end of it. Let me put this in a place your body knows. You're driving. Not the commute, the long one, the one where you're going to be in the car for 6 hours. Somewhere past the last exit with a real gas station, past the outlet mall and the water tower with a town's name on it, out where the fields go flat and the fence posts start looking like the same fence post repeating, and the radio starts to go. The station you had on gets thin, a little hiss underneath, then more hiss than music, then a second station bleeding in over the top of the first one, and then just that dry static that sounds like something being poured. So you hit seek, and the numbers roll all the way around the dial and land right back where they started, and you hit it again, and it does it again. Nothing's broken. The radio is fine. You have simply driven past the range of every transmitter that was ever aimed at you. That's what the hollowness is. You've moved out of range of the signals you grew up receiving. The ones from your parents' idea of a good life, your hometown's idea, your industry's idea, the version of success your college dropped into you in 4 years and $80,000. Those transmitters are still broadcasting. They work great for the people still standing where you used to stand. You just aren't there anymore. And that first hour of static is genuinely awful. Because for your whole life, something coming through the speakers has been how you knew where you were. Now there's nothing coming through, and the only conclusion available to you, in the moment, is that something in you has failed. Nothing failed. You went out of range. Those are wildly different situations, and you've been treating one like the other for a long time now. Notice what the mistake costs you. When you think you're broken, you go looking for a repair. And the repair, 99 times out of 100, is more of the exact same thing that stopped working. A better title, a bigger place, a cleaner routine. Another item added to the bottom of the list that already didn't pay out. That's a person in the middle of Nebraska hitting seek harder. The reframe is small, and it changes the whole trip. The static is not a verdict on you. It's a location. It's information about where you are, and where you are is out past the edge of the borrowed signal, which is, and I want to say this plainly, exactly where a person has to be standing before anything of their own can start. You can't build your own values inside a life that's still comfortably receiving somebody else's. There's no reason to. Why would you? The music was fine. It takes silence to make somebody start singing. Now, the other thing that happens on the morning after, and this one's more delicate. Think about the dinner. Somebody organized it. Your partner, or your friends, or your team went out after work. There's a table. There's a toast. Somebody says something genuinely kind about you and means it. Everyone lifts a glass, and you are watching the entire thing from about a foot outside your own body. You're doing the face. You're saying the thing about how it was a team effort. And underneath, running quiet the whole time, is a low hum of guilt, because these people are being wonderful and you can't feel it, and you would rather be almost anywhere else on earth. I want to be clear about what that is, because people scare themselves with it. That's not coldness, and it's not depression by itself, and it's definitely not you being an ungrateful person. It's that applause can only be received by whoever wanted the thing, and the person who wanted that promotion. The one who set the goal 3 years ago, who studied for it, who negotiated for it. That person has been slowly leaving the building for a while. You've been changing underneath your own life. Quietly, without permission, without a single dramatic moment. And when the reward finally showed up, it got delivered to a former address. That's what hollow actually is, mechanically, not an absence of feeling. A mismatch between the person being congratulated and the person doing the standing. And it can't be fixed by more applause. That's the part that takes people years to accept. If a bigger version of the same reward would have solved it, you'd already be solved, because you've gotten bigger versions before and you remember exactly how long the good feeling lasted. About a day and a half, sometimes less. So the direction has to change. Not up. Sideways, into something that has no applause attached to it at all, which is the hardest possible move for anyone raised in this country, where being seen doing well is more or less the water we swim in. And that's a whole territory on its own, honestly. If you haven't sat with that one yet, there's a reflection here called Why Silence Makes You Powerful: The Way of the Lone Path. And it walks straight into what happens to a person who starts building something nobody is clapping for. It's worth going through alongside this one, because they're two halves of the same turn. For here, the point is narrower. Something in you has already outgrown the terms you were living by. That's not a wound. That's growth showing up in the only way growth ever shows up from the inside, which is as discomfort with something that used to fit. If that landed, leave a like on this. It's the quiet thing that puts it in front of the next person sitting in their car in a restaurant parking lot after their own celebration, wondering what's wrong with them. Because nothing is wrong with them either. They just got a delivery at an old address. We should talk about why so many people hit this in their 30s and 40s, and why it feels so much like a private personal failure when it's actually the weather of an entire era. Nietzsche wrote the line everyone knows and almost nobody understands. God is dead. It gets quoted like a taunt, usually by someone who's never read a page of him, and it's not a taunt. It's a diagnosis, and he was uneasy about it. What he meant was that Western culture had quietly stopped believing in the shared source that used to hold everything else up, and that most people hadn't noticed yet because the furniture was all still in the room. The moral habits, the sense that life had a built-in point, the feeling that your work and your suffering fit into a larger story someone else was writing. All of that had been resting on a foundation that was no longer bearing weight. He wasn't celebrating. He was asking what happens to people when the thing that answered why goes quiet and nothing replaces it. And you already know the answer because you're living inside it. When the big source goes quiet, people don't stop needing a why. They just distribute it across smaller things. So a career becomes a religion. The gym becomes a religion. A diet does. A team does. A political identity does, for a lot of people, and I'm not going anywhere near which one. Getting the house becomes a spiritual project, and each of these can carry the load for a while, genuinely, for years, because they give you a rule, a ranking, and a direction to face. Then one of them delivers. You reach the thing. And the smallness of it is suddenly visible, and there's a hollow where the meaning was supposed to be sitting. That's not you failing at contentment. That's a structural fact about borrowed purpose. It runs out exactly at the moment it's fulfilled. Now, Nietzsche saw 2 ways people go from here, and one of them is the reason he was worried. Some people go numb. He had an image for this. A kind of person he called the last man, someone who's given up on anything demanding and settled into small comforts, who has a little pleasure for the day and a little for the night and no longer wants anything big enough to hurt. Everything managed, everything mild, nothing risked. And it's easy to do. It's honestly the default in a country this comfortable. 32 ounces of something cold, a screen, a weekend, a Saturday run to the warehouse store for a flat of paper towels and a rotisserie chicken and a $9 thing you didn't need. Weeks vanish. Years do. I'm not mocking any of that. I have loved plenty of ordinary Saturdays. The problem is only when they're the anesthetic. Which brings me to the thing I most want you to hear tonight. The hollowness you're feeling is the proof that you didn't go numb. If you'd made the trade, you wouldn't feel it. That's the whole point of the trade. The ache in your chest at 6:40 in the morning is not the sign that you're doing worse than the people around you who seem fine. It's the sign that something in you refused a deal that a lot of people accepted years ago without knowing they were signing. That sensitivity you've apologized for your entire life. Right now, it's functioning as an alarm that most people's alarms were disconnected from. You're not behind. You're awake at an inconvenient hour. Nietzsche laid out the way a person actually changes in 3 stages. And once you see them, you'll be able to locate yourself on the map, which is worth a lot on a night like this. He wrote it as 3 metamorphoses of the spirit. First, you become a camel. Then the camel becomes a lion. Then, if you make it, the lion becomes a child. Stay with me, because it's less abstract than it sounds. He's describing 3 different relationships to what's expected of you, and you have lived at least one of them for a very long time. The camel is the one who kneels down and asks to be loaded. That's not an insult. He meant it with real respect. The camel is the part of a person that wants to be strong enough to carry something heavy, that takes on the hardest version of the duty on purpose. Its whole world runs on 2 words, you shall. You shall finish what you started. You shall not complain when it's hard. You shall be the reliable one, the one who covers the shift, the one who calls on Sundays, the one who handles it so nobody else has to. And then the camel walks out into the desert with all of it on its back, which is the part of the image people miss. The camel doesn't collapse. It goes further into the empty place than anyone else would, precisely because it's the one strong enough to carry the load out there. You were a camel, maybe for 20 years. You took the job you didn't love because it was the responsible move, and you were good at it. You paid down the thing. You showed up to the funeral and the graduation and the surgery and the move. You were the one people called, and you never once said, actually, I can't right now, and half the reason you're tired isn't the work, it's the never once. I want to say something about those years, because the version of this idea you'll find online usually treats them as wasted time you were tricked into. They weren't wasted. They're the reason you can do what comes next. Everything you're about to need. The capacity to keep a promise to yourself with nobody watching. The tolerance for discomfort. The ability to finish. You built in the camel years, under someone else's instructions, for someone else's reasons. Strength doesn't care why it was built. It transfers. The camel phase isn't a mistake. It's an apprenticeship you didn't know you were in. And here's how you know it's ending. The load stops feeling heavy and starts feeling pointless. That's the tell. Not exhaustion. Exhaustion you can push through. You've done it 100 times. This is different. This is the specific moment where you're doing the thing correctly and some part of you is standing off to the side going, for what? That question is the desert. And in the desert, according to him, is where the second transformation happens. The camel becomes a lion. The lion has one job, and it's not what you'd expect from a lion. It doesn't build anything. It can't. It has exactly one power, and Nietzsche called it the sacred no. The lion is the part of you that finally says no to a you shall you never agreed to. It's much less cinematic than it sounds. It almost never looks like storming out of anywhere. In real American life, the lion shows up like this. You're at a Tuesday night dinner at your in-laws, and somebody asks the question about when you're going to make the next move, and instead of the answer you always give, you hear yourself say, honestly, I don't think I want that. And the table goes a little quiet, and you feel your face get warm. And under the embarrassment, there's a strange thrill you don't have any words for. Or it's smaller than that. You stop answering the group text at 10 at night. You don't sign up for the thing you always sign up for. You let somebody be disappointed in you and you don't fix it. That's the lion. That's the whole animal. It clears ground. And now the honest part, because this stage is where people get hurt, and I'm not going to sell you a clean version of it. The lion phase is lonely, and it can turn mean if you camp there. You start to see the machinery in everything, and for a while, everything looks fake. The company values on the break room wall, the house everyone's supposed to want, the way people talk about their weekends. You get an edge you didn't used to have, and the people who loved the camel version of you feel it immediately and don't know what happened. Some folks stay there for a decade. They build an entire identity out of refusing. Refusing careers, refusing normal life, refusing anything with a hint of convention in it. And they call it freedom. And it isn't, because being against everything is just being ruled by it backwards. The lion that never becomes anything else ends up as a person who is very clear about what they hate and has no idea what they love. Nietzsche knew that. The lion isn't the destination. The no only exists to make room for something. And in that room, before the something arrives, is the emptiness you're in right now. That's what I want you to have. The hollow feeling isn't the absence of your life. It's the cleared space between the no and the not yet, and it is supposed to be uncomfortable. In the same way that the hour after you tear the old cabinets out is uncomfortable. You're standing in the middle of a kitchen that no longer works, holding a pry bar, thinking, what have I done? You didn't do anything wrong. You just got to the part in the middle. And that discomfort, that inability to just settle back down and be satisfied with the old arrangement, that's the same sensitivity that's been costing you your whole life, finally doing something useful. You feel the falseness of a life that doesn't fit because you feel everything. Blunter people can live in the wrong life indefinitely and never notice. You couldn't. You never could. That's not a curse. That's the instrument that got you all the way out here to the edge of the map. And now the third one, which is the whole point, and which almost nobody sees coming. The lion becomes a child. Not childish. Not naive. What he meant is the state where you can start something new without needing permission for it. A beginning, a wheel rolling on its own, a sacred yes to something that has no justification except that it's yours. The child creates. That's the difference. The camel carries what it was given. The lion refuses what it was given. The child makes something that wasn't there. Which brings us to the largest thing in all of this, and I want to slow down for it. The emptiness is not a hole where meaning used to be. It's the only condition under which you could ever make meaning of your own. As long as a why is being supplied from outside, you don't build one. Nobody does. Why would you take on a job that's already being done for you? The purpose was arriving on schedule from your family, your school, your industry, your church, your friend group's idea of a good life. It was free, and it worked, and you never had to develop the muscle. And then one day it stopped arriving. And the arrival of nothing is the first moment in your life when the job became yours. That's the summons. That's what the hollow is actually asking. It isn't asking you to find something you lost. It's asking you to make something nobody has made yet. A set of values that are actually yours, tested against your own experience, that hold up in your own kitchen at 11 at night. Nietzsche borrowed a line from an ancient Greek poet and used it as his own instruction, and it's the only 3 words you'd need if you forgot everything else in this video. Become who you are. Not find who you are, like it's a set of keys under a couch cushion. Become. It's a construction project. There's no true self buried in you waiting to be excavated. There's a direction, a set of raw materials, a temperament, and about 40 more years, and what you do with those is the self. Look out the window for a second with me. Every single generation has had people standing exactly where you're standing. The kid who left a farm town in 1922 with no plan and a suitcase, who got called selfish for going. Your grandmother, at some point, standing in a kitchen with her hands in the sink, deciding what her one life was going to be about, and never telling anyone that she'd had to decide. The man who walked away from the family business. The woman who went back to school at 46 and got a lot of comments about it. Not one of them had a map. Every one of them stood in this same clearing, in the static, out past the range of everything they'd been handed, and had to make the next thing up out of themselves. You've never been as alone in this as those 6:40 mornings made it feel. You're standing in the oldest clearing there is, and most people who walk through it never even look up and see where they are. So what does the making actually look like on a normal week, in a normal American life where you can't blow anything up because there are people depending on you? It starts embarrassingly small. It starts with one want that nobody assigned you. You know the moment I mean, because you've probably had one and dismissed it. You're driving past the exit for the lake, and you get an urge to just go, and you don't. Or you see a flyer for a woodworking class at the community college and you look at it for 8 seconds too long. Or you find yourself watching a video about beekeeping at midnight for no reason you can defend. And then the question arrives that kills almost every one of these before it breathes. What's the point? That question is the last transmitter still reaching you. It's the borrowed signal in its final form. Because what it's really asking is, where does this fit on the list, and how would I explain it to somebody? The answer, and this is the whole practice, is that it doesn't fit and you don't have to explain it. The first true one almost always has 3 features, and once you know them, you can spot yours. It's useless. No career value, no impressive story, nothing to post. It's slightly embarrassing to say out loud, which is exactly why you've never said it. And it's quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps coming back after you've dismissed it 11 times. That's your material. That's the beginning of the thing that's yours. And the test for whether it's real is simple and unforgiving. Do it where nobody can see it, and see if it survives 6 weeks. If it dies, the moment there's no audience, it was one more item for the old list wearing a disguise. If it keeps pulling at you in the dark, on a Wednesday, with nobody to tell, that's a value of your own, showing up in the only way values ever show up. Not as a belief, as a pull. You don't decide what you value by thinking hard about it in a chair. You find out by noticing where your energy actually goes when nothing is due. A couple of other places to look, since you'll want somewhere to put your hands. Notice what you get jealous of. Real jealousy, the kind with a little sting, not polite admiration. Jealousy is a terrible character trait and an excellent compass because it points at something you want and won't let yourself claim. And notice what you were doing at 11 years old before anyone told you what any of it was worth. Not to go back. You can't, and you wouldn't like it, but because that kid had preferences that hadn't been priced yet. You're going to be tempted to wait until you're sure. Don't. Certainty is not available at this stage and never has been for anyone. You pick something with your own hands, you commit to it for a season, you find out what it does to you, and you adjust. That's how a value gets made. It gets made the way anything gets made, badly at first. And if somebody you love is in their own version of this year, going through the motions of a life that works, unable to say why it feels like nothing, send them this, not as advice, just as company. It matters more than you'd think to hear that the hollow means something. Let me tell you what actually changes, because it's smaller than the movie version and better than the movie version. Your life may look nearly identical from the outside for a long time. Same job, maybe. Same street. Nobody's going to write anything about it. The change is that the center of gravity moves from out there to in here, and you can feel the difference on a Tuesday. What used to be an obligation becomes a choice you're making, on purpose, for reasons you can actually name. You still go to work, but you're not waiting for it to pay you in meaning anymore, and that alone takes about 40 pounds off it. You still show up for your family, but you're doing it because you decided that's who you are, not because a "you shall" from 1991 is still running in the background. Same actions, completely different person performing them. That's what alignment actually means if the word is going to be worth keeping, not floating, not everything falling into place. Just your outsides finally taking orders from your own inside instead of from a signal you stopped believing in years ago. And people around you will feel it, and not one of them will be able to say what changed. There's nothing mystical in that. It's just that a person who has stopped waiting for their life to justify itself carries a completely different atmosphere into a room. Less bracing, less scanning, less of that low hum of a question that never gets answered. Everyone picks it up. Nobody names it. Nietzsche has one more thing to offer here, and it's the warmest thing he ever came up with. And it's the note I want to leave you on. He called it amor fati, love of your fate. Not resignation, not pretending the hard parts were secretly good. Something more demanding than that, getting to the point where you would say yes to your own life. This one, including the wasted decade and the flat morning after the promotion and the years you spent chasing a list somebody handed you before you could read it. You get there not by deciding the past was fine. You get there by building something out of it that makes you glad it happened the way it did. The camel years become the strength. The static becomes the clearing. The hollow becomes the summons. He couldn't offer anybody a cosmic reason for their life. He was honest about that, and I'm not going to be less honest with you at midnight. There's no guarantee stitched into the universe. What he offered instead is that you are allowed to be the one who says what your life is about, and that this is not a consolation prize, it's the actual dignity of being a person. I'd like to know your version. Somewhere in the last half hour, something specific came to mind. The achievement that landed flat, or the small useless want you've dismissed 11 times and never told anyone. Tell me about that one in the comments. People read them late at night, usually while feeling like the only person alive who has a good life and can't feel it. Yours might be the thing that reaches them. If you want to keep going, subscribe and leave a like. There's more of this to walk through, and we'll take it one layer at a time. And when you start building the thing that's actually yours, there won't be anybody applauding for a while, which is its own strange discipline. If you haven't sat with it yet, the reflection called Why Silence Makes You Powerful the Way of the Lone Path is worth walking through when you get to that stretch. For now, just this. The emptiness in you isn't a room you got locked inside. It's the first space in your entire life that nobody else has furnished. And it's been waiting, patiently, for you to stop apologizing for the quiet and start deciding what belongs there.